Hello friends and welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're just going to go over a bunch of Unreal tips and tricks that I've learned. So my my plan was to come up with 50 tips and tricks that people don't really know about for Unreal, and then maybe use that for like a presentation guideline or for talks for students or something. But I got a little bit carried away, and my list is about 200 tips long. Everything from like stuff in the editor, materials and textures, rendering, lighting, blueprints, things like that. So today we're just going to go over a bunch of different tips for just the editor. If there's interest, I would love to dive into some of those other topics as well. I guess we'll just see how this is received. So without further ado, let's go. So we're not going to make anything per se. We're just going to show how to set up the editor and customize things and really get in the habit of making your projects as efficient as possible. So here we are. We're in the the first map that you load into for any project that you make. You may notice on my screen I have things set up a little bit differently. So if we open this here, I have my modes tucked next to my world outliner. I found that I use that the least common. And then I have my world settings here over by the details. So if I am, it freezes when I click things, great. When I am editing an object, I'm not doing things with the lighting scenarios as well either. So that's good for me. And then I keep the content down here with the message log next to it. So a few things, a lot of these notes people probably already know. I don't mean to bore you, but a lot of these are common things that people don't know about. So what I like to do customize my editor is make these a little bit smaller. We don't need all that text, but I like to get rid of as much clutter as I have. So first let's go into the project settings. This is one of the first things I do every time I start a project in Unreal. Let's see if it wants to open. I have a lot going on. So first of all, we're using our tutorial project from the ArcViz series, and this is right after the light build failed. So here we are. We opened this project and it brought us to this template underscore default. What I always do is I select the map that I actually am building in. So you do that here, maps and modes under project settings, and you want your editor and game default to match that. So that's always the first thing I do. And then after that, I go up here to edit editor preferences. And in here, I'm not sure why, but auto-saving doesn't seem to work very well for me. It just crashes sometimes when it auto-saves, and then when it does load an autosave, it doesn't load things correctly. So I always go in and I just disable the enable autosave. I like to live life on the edge, I suppose. So there's that. Next, let's talk about the viewport itself. So naturally we have the lit view here, right? And it's just one big window. What we can also do is we can go up here to Window Viewports. And let me open up a viewport too. Remember, I have a second screen to the right here, so you might not see everything that I have. So when I'm working on a 2 or 3 monitor setup, what I like to do is I'll have my main composition over here. I'll have my materials on a second screen. And if I have a third screen, maybe like a large TV monitor, I'll actually keep a second viewport docked full screen to that window. So then if I'm making changes out here and I'm moving shit around, and let's add some cubes in here. Let's get like in here. Over here, you're seeing in the second viewport, it's not changing the view at all. If you have maybe some clients who get uncomfortable when things move around pretty quickly, that can help them out. So I like to have a second viewport open all the time. And additionally, if you're doing things where you're messing with view modes, it's only going to apply to that single viewport that you're in. So along with that, let's look at some of the view modes that we do have here. So we have our perspective view that we're in naturally, but you also have these orthographic views. So you can get a mathematically correct image of your environment. If you're working on ArcViz or anything with construction, architecture, anything like that, you're probably going to be relying on your orthographic views pretty often. So you'll notice it automatically switched to wireframe view. And I usually work in unlit when I'm in orthographic. One thing I noticed, I commonly hit G on the keyboard to switch to game mode. If we let's add a few lights in here. Boom. Copy that over. All right, so we have a few different game elements here, and if we go to our top view, we see that we still have those there. And if I hit G, it doesn't hide those. You can hear my clicky keyboard just going away there. So how do we get around this? This is a bug that's I hate these little things. So if you go to your perspective view, hit G here, and then you go to your orthographic, then it'll be gone, and you can't toggle game view in orthographic. Dumb, I know. Okay, so there's that. Let's open up our test map that we've been using in this ArcViz series. Let's go over some of these other things here. I have 2 instances of Unreal open right now, as well as 3ds Max, and we're just chugging along again. Well, in the meantime, let's open up this project. So this is a game I'm working on right now. I'll come back to this, I'm sure. Let's go to our game view, and let's look at some of these optimization view modes. We're still compiling shaders. You see, I still have some gray materials on the walls over here. I like to use text boxes for my personal note keeping. By default, we're at lit, like we said. Unlit, you can look at that, wireframe, and so on. Let's look at these down here. So we have our light map density is pretty commonly used. And like we said in the ArcViz series, you typically want this to be bluish green, red if you're doing some crazy ArcViz stuff. And you also notice too there's some brown in here, like this weird brownish color. That's because that is movable or dynamic. So that door should be able to swing open. This is obviously an NPC, so that appears that way. And there's a few other things in here too that I like to use. If you go down to your buffer visualization, go down to roughness. This, well, still compiling shaders, it's not going to work, but it gives you a black and white view of all of the roughness in your scene. So we'll see if that'll work here when we come back to it. A few other things in here. Subsurface color is very nice if you're doing anything with subsurface, maybe in like an icy cave or anything like that, anything with fleshy tones. Metallic can be helpful if you're doing anything with rust, can be very nice as well. So this is a little trick for those folks who work with marketing departments. So you'll notice over time that people like just different styles, and like the artsy matrixy looks and stuff. If you're selling anything with CG images, what I like to do to really get those marketing people happy, if you go down to show and then go down to advanced and turn on mesh edges, and look at this, you can actually get a wireframe view overlaid on your lit view, or yeah, your unlit as well. So what I used to do for still images to simulate this would be make a screenshot in our lit view here, and then drop down to wireframe, hide the objects in the background as needed, and then overlay them in Photoshop. You can get some pretty good stuff going on there, but it just didn't look great, and I wanted something more dynamic, something a bit more showy. So again, that's show and then advanced and mesh edges right here. It's very helpful sometimes, and you can do a lot with you can visualize your splines in Unreal without having to select them. So it's very nice. There's a lot of things in here that might be worth looking into at your convenience. It's yeah, definitely very helpful. Okay, so on to the next thing. If we look around this environment, like we said, there's switch our optimization view here. There's some red and there's some blue. The reason being some of these light maps are overridden incorrectly, but I will come back to that later. So this is 1024 resolution, and this is going to be 64. If I were to notice that my light build is just taking way too long and unnecessarily, what I might do is I go up to Window and then down to Statistics. And then here you can get some information for everything that's in your scene. So by default, we're looking at primitive stats, and it's showing all of the meshes that are in there, and you can see how many actors there are, how many triangles. That can be helpful for kind of figuring out what your problems are coming from. But if we go to our static mesh lighting info, this is helpful for you ArcViz folks as well. Look at your sort by resolution here. we notice that the walls, these two walls here, are sucking up the most resolution. And I have some objects down here, 64. I don't believe I have anything. Yeah, I have some 32, 16. So if I had some issues, what I might do is look up here, see what's the highest resolution, see if I can either turn those down or rebuild them in such a way that they don't have to be such a high resolution. And then there's things like these bottles here, and I know I have a lot of those bottles in the scene, and those are up to 128. So I might think about how to minimize some of that that's going on. All right, and next, another thing I like to do in all of my scenes is I go up to, let's see, if we go to Window, and again, we're in 420 right now, so some of these things might be outdated in later versions of Unreal. If we go down to Developer Tools and then to Widget Reflector, open up on my second screen, I always like to, like I was saying, keep the clutter out of my view as much as I can. Well, I usually take this application scale and I turn that down to a 0.9 or so, and you can see what's going on. It's making everything smaller. It almost looks like I'm, getting closer to a 4K screen that I don't have. So turning that down just so I don't need to read this text as well, and the text down here. I know what all these things say without having to read all of the words. It helps me with my screen real estate a little bit. So let's turn back to 1 in case that causes any issues down the line. If we turn on demo mode, you can actually see it puts a little pink outline on wherever you click on the screen. I also notice if you lower the application scale and use the demo mode, it's offset from your pointer. So I'm not sure if that's a recurring bug or what's going on there, but I avoid that just because I use my widget application scale there. Okay, so on to the next. This is a common thing. I'm surprised not a lot of people know about it. Oh, now that's before I screw everything up. If we go up to our buffer visualization, let's go down to roughness again. Still not working. I don't know why it's not working. Maybe it is. Well, we'll try it on the other project. But anyway, so let's take a mesh and let's just duplicate it and move it a little bit. If you bring a mesh in, say from 3ds Max, and your pivot is in the middle of nowhere, maybe it's like way over here, or like just not centered to your object. One thing you might want to do: select your object, right-click where you want the new pivot to be, go down to Pivot, choose Set Pivot Offset here, and it'll say Pivot Snapped. And there you go. You have your pivot there. Looks great, fantastic. It'll rotate and scale around that pivot. But if you undo or if you click away from the actor, it reverts back to the original position. So let's say we don't want that. Let's right-click again. Let's go Pivot, Set Pivot Offset here, Snapped. Great. And then if we right-click that pivot, let's choose Set as Pivot Offset. Now it'll permanently be stuck there. So I believe I covered this in the ArcViz series as well. But that's a nice thing to have, especially if you're working with some inconsistent meshes in some of your projects too. And while we're here, let's look at something else. So let's say we're doing some crazy rotational things, and I don't know what what use case we'd have here. Let's say we rotated something a bit askew. If you go up here, you can cycle your transform gizmo between world and local. So now if we just want to rotate this, so this plane itself isn't rotating, we can rotate along that plane, and that's just local to that pivot instead of the world pivot. So again, if we just click that right there, we can switch back and forth. So that applies to your position as well as your rotation. So bit of a handy thing. I don't think I've needed it for anything, but good thing to know about. Okay, let's look at another thing. This tip comes from Tharo VFX. He has this really great Unreal tips and tricks blog. I've taken some of these and added them to my own list of tips and tricks, but let's go over just one or two of the big ones that I found on this page too. So if you he mentions, sorry if I mispronounced your name, you have Boolean search results. So right up here, if we go up here, we search fog. We don't have any fog in our scene. Let's add some fog. How about that? So we just added atmospheric and exponential height fog. So if we go up here to our search and we search for fog, we get those. But let's say we want to work with that as well as our directional light at the same time. So we might, change our fog settings up here, and then we go up here, go to our directional light, select that, make some changes, and then we have to go back to the fog because we have to keep balancing it. That's not going to work for us. So what we could do is we can go fog and then do this tall bracket. This is shift and then the backspace that's under your delete key on your keyboard. So we'll do fog, that thing, and then light. And this will show all of the fogs and all of the lights. And look at this. We have our directional light right here, and we have our fog right there. So now we can, make those changes as needed, and we don't have to keep going back and forth and back and forth. Similarly, what we have is, let's say we want, how are we going to do this? Okay, so we have two things in our scene that have directional in them, but for whatever reason we don't want to show our wind, or maybe it's I don't know. You can think of something later. Maybe it's pillars and walls or whatever. You can do directional and then ampersand light, and it will show everything that has those two things. So that can be handy as well. I haven't had an application for that, but good thing to know about, isn't it? Okay, so this is a very messy scene. Obviously, I have a lot of just shit everywhere. So what I typically do is I make an animations folder, textures, blueprints, meshes, materials, material functions, and so on. And then what I do is let's take our blueprints folder here, and I'll color code everything. So we right-click that, choose set color, boom. Most people don't know about this, but you can actually color code your folders, and it actually saves those as well. So that's a pretty nice thing. Let's go into a material then. Just any old random material. Let's take this wood plank. Okay, so we have our material in here. Most people don't know about this. What you can actually do is, this applies to blueprints as well as material graphs. We'll select everything and we'll Control-C. We're going to copy that. And let's go to our notepad. And this is crazy. Boom. We can actually paste nodes into text. I don't know if you guys think that's as amazing as I think, but that's pretty cool. So if you're working with someone, maybe on a forum or something and trying to share what you're working on, you can actually copy and paste your materials without having to send a whole project, which is pretty helpful. What's next? I had something cool in here. What was I going to talk about in here? I know what it was. Okay, so I'm going to hold 3 and click so we get a vector 3. Let's make a color here, and let's say we're working with a advertising company, and they have a very specific color swatch for their client. We like getting crazy with the colors, right? But we want to stick with the colors that they specified. So let's go in here, and let's say this is the color that we got from the client. This is the company's blue. It's trademarked and everything. What you can actually do is you select it in here, and then you can drag it up here to save it. That's good. Okay, let's go over to our second color here. Let's drag that up here. Cool. Let's go up here and let's drag this one up here. So now we have the swatch of 3 colors. We actually have a theme for it as well. So let's call it client. Oops, did I save that? Yep, client, accept. Great. So we have this color swatch here now. And if we actually open up any other material, we'll actually see we have that exact same swatch in here that we can pick. So you could go in and you could actually just choose those color values. This could save you some time. It's just one of those tricks that people don't really know about, so might be worth thinking about and keeping in mind. Okay, this is covered in the ArcViz series as well, but one thing I always like to do is go up here and you go to your bookmarks, and you can, I have some bookmarks set here already. You can set bookmark here, so let's make a bookmark 2. And then if we hit 2 on the keyboard, it'll actually jump us right back there. And I had a 1 here and a 4 here, so it's a good way to keep your progress, and maybe like over time just keep taking pictures from the same spot. It's good for consistency, good thing to help you out. And for shortcuts, you can actually do Control and the number. So we just did Control 3. So if we hit 2, 3, camera 2, camera 3, pretty cool, huh? Okay, so next, while we're here, if you wanted to do just quick renders in Unreal without having to maybe do like the snipping tool or print screen, throw it into Photoshop, whatever, go up here and go down to high resolution screenshot. And it pops up this little window here, and we let's say we just take a photo right here. Click down here, and it brings you right to where that is. That's great, fantastic. So we got this high res screenshot 01. You can see the resolution that we got is pretty small, so 1352 by 653. Let's close out of there. Let's crank this up to 3, and it's going to take a second to load this time. And look at this, we have 4,000 by almost 2,000 screenshot, and the see if we can preview both of them. So here's our first one, and then our second one. They're essentially identical because we have the same size that we're viewing. But you get the higher resolution if you're going for 4K renders. Oh no, autosave. If you're going for 4K renders, it could be very good to get that higher resolution going. Don't go above 4. I found that anything above that can crash your computer, or it's just not really worth your time. Similarly, if you were doing renders and you need to, let's say you're doing 1920 by 1080 renders, what I would do is I'd kick it out at 4, and then bring it to Photoshop and downscale it to 1920 by 1080. Reason being, you can get rid of a bunch of anti-aliasing artifacts and issues like that. So pretty helpful. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. So let's go back to our other project. Goodbye. Oh, come on, buddy. All right. So this is that project where we're having those light map issues, and we have things pretty neat in here. But let's say we really want to look at the material functions that Unreal had set up, like the blend modes that they made for us. So you don't see it down here. If we were to search for blend underscore overlay, it's not going to show. What gives, Unreal? A quick way to show everything. I know there's somewhere down here you can right click, and I think you go in here or something, and you can show engine content. Another quick way, drag a cube in your scene or just any of these meshes, and then hit Control B on the keyboard, or you can right click and where is it? Browse to asset, and then you'll see here in our browser, it actually showed this engine content as well as engine C++ content. So now we actually have all of those things that we didn't have access to previously. So if we were to blend overlay search now, there you go. And then if you select that, Control B, it'll show where that is. So here's all of those blend material functions that Unreal made. It's really, there's some really powerful tools in here. You might want to just search through these sometimes, but like for gradients, they have a whole material function just for diamond gradients. And if we look at it in here, you can see they have all the math set up, so you don't have to do all the shit yourself. Just let them do it and use the material function in your own graph. That can be its own whole lesson. I guess I won't get too deep into functions. That can kind of get crazy. What else we got? Last thing I got for you guys. Let's say you, 2 things. If you were to bring this lamp into your scene and you're not working with a grid for some reason, and you really want this to be on the ground, so you keep like, you get in here and you'll drag it, and you overshot it, so let's get a little bit closer, and you don't know if that's really there, so you switch to your unlit view, and maybe you move your pivot. It's a bunch of baloney. What you can do instead, just select your mesh and hit End on the keyboard. And son of a bitch, I don't have collision set up. Let's do it with something that has collisions. Okay, great. So let's take these cubes here, and you're doing the same thing. You're trying to get that cube like nested right on there. Not working. Hit End on your keyboard, and it will snap that bottom surface to the next surface that it finds below it. So that's a really great way to get your contact exactly right, and it's very precise that way. So if we were to actually get it over the edge here, and if we hit End, it'll snap right to that edge because it's overlapped. So that's pretty cool. Last thing I want to go over, so we, in that ArcViz series, we brought in this whole file from Revit. Ignore the lighting. I was having some hardware issues, blah, blah, blah. Long story short. Let's say we want to take this lamp that was made in Revit, and we want to add a bunch of details. So let's say we select it, and we can either hit Control B or click this magnifying glass here to show it in the browser. And we'll right click it down here and choose Asset Actions, and then go to Export. And we'll just find a place to put this. We'll put it in my tutorials folder, name it whatever we want, and that's fine. Keep it as default. And now we're going to open up 3ds Max, and we're going to go to our tutorials, and let's see. Here's our FBX we just kicked out. Let's drag that into 3ds. Import. Okay, there we go. And let's just center that up. Okay. Great. Okay, so this is that same lamp, obviously. And let's say we wanted to, let's make some quick changes to it. So let's take it, convert to editable poly, and as always, let's quadrify, get rid of some of those extra lines. And I don't like hard edges, so I'm going to take those and I'm just going to chamfer the crap out of them. It's a bit excessive, but let's do it anyway. And get rid of that. Let's choose our edges, and let's make some weird design here, right? Let's extrude these. Oh boy. Okay, we have a gnarly looking lamp now. Cool. Just what I wanted. Let's say we wanted to make this lampshade a little bit more dramatic. Let's whew, that's not gonna work. Not worry about it. Okay, so we made our changes. Let's go ahead up here, and we'll just go up to export, and we brought it in as an FBX. We know Unreal likes FBX, so we're going to just overwrite that file we brought in, and I'm going to replace it, and all my stuff's already set up. And let's go back into Unreal, and let's find that file that we just edited, 825. Okay, time's right. We know it's the same file. And let's just bring that right back into Unreal. And it's actually going to overwrite this file. And you see there's that little star there. That means it is not saved yet. You also notice it says the lighting needs to be rebuilt. If you had your lighting built and you had just done this, it would invalidate your light build. So tread lightly, my friends. Don't overwrite your meshes if you're not wanting to do another light build. And you'll notice that we have those changes reflected here now. It looks... actually not as horrible as I thought it would. But we see there's all of that geometry there as well. So now that we have that imported and it's linked to that file, let's go back into 3ds Max. We don't have to do anything. Let's say we wanted to take this base. I don't need that bottom. Let's take this base and let's extrude this. Yep. Oh, beautiful. Love it. And we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to export same file, overwrite it. Thank you. And here we are in 3ds again. And this time we're not going to drag it in. All we're going to do is we're going to right click it down here. You can't do it. You can't right click in here. You got to right click it in your browser. Right click this guy, go to Asset Actions, and then, no, don't go to Asset Actions. Go up here to Re-import, and it will reflect those changes. So if you're doing some very rapid iteration, maybe with like furniture or some design element you're working on, maybe it's trying to get some faces to line up with something else in your scene, that's a very quick way to do it. So what I like to do is I'll make changes in here, and let's just ruin this. Go up to export, boom, 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 and then go into 3ds, and then just re-import, and it did the same thing. So that's great. I'm hoping that Unreal is going to support some more live linking with meshes and geometry. I think if you're working with Substance, it does this in real time. Similarly, if you're working with a Photoshop file that is directly imported into Unreal, then it should do the same thing. I don't import PSD, but I believe that would do the same. So I hope these tips were pretty helpful. Again, I can go over some of the other tips that I mentioned. We could talk about blueprints, shaders, materials, rendering, lighting, anything that you guys want to talk about. I could also talk about some VR optimization and things to consider there. So let me know what you think, and I'm happy to help out. Thanks.